In the last lesson, when we were looking at rationalizing denominators, we had a monomial, a single term in the denominator. If there are two terms in the denominator, we want to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the conjugate of the denominator. Now remember, we talked about conjugates 2 or 3 lessons ago. That's when the sign in the middle changes. So if you start with a plus b, the conjugate would be a minus b. If you start with a minus b, the conjugate would be a plus b. But in both cases, we can use the formula a squared minus b squared to evaluate it. So for this example that we have, multiplying by the conjugate means we're multiplying by root 7 minus root 3. Remember, you have to multiply the numerator and the denominator because, of course, again, this equals 1. We're changing the way the fraction, the expression looks. We're not changing its value. We're going to need to use the distributive property in the numerator, but in the denominator, we can use our formula, a squared minus b squared. Root 2 times root 7 is root 14. I cannot simplify that. Minus root 2 times root 3 minus root 6 all over root 7 squared minus root 3 squared. Root 14 minus root 6 cannot be combined. These are not like radicals. 7 minus 3 in the denominator. All over 4. And again, even though those are all even numbers, the root 2, that is a factor in root 14 and root 6, it is not the same as the 2 in the denominator. This cannot be simplified any further. Why don't you, I'll tell you what, we'll do question 1 together. I'll let you do question 2. Let's multiply by the conjugate. Change the sign in the middle of the denominator, and we're multiplying both numerator and denominator. Use the distributive property here. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 4 times root 5. Remember, we cannot go any further than that. All over a squared minus b squared. All right, 8 plus 4 root 5 all over 4 minus 5 all over negative 1. We wouldn't leave a negative 1 in the denominator, so we can write this negative sign outside the numerator. We don't need the denominator of 1 at all, or multiply it through. I would think that Pearson would call this first one factored form, and the second one if they're not asking for factored form. Pause your video, try question 2. So we multiply the numerator and the denominator by the conjugate, root 7 plus 1. The denominator is a squared minus b squared. Now I see that when I subtract in the denominator there, 7 minus 1, I'm going to have an even number. I also see in the numerator that 2 is common. So I'm going to factor 2 out. And then 7 minus 1 is 6. Now I see I can simplify that fraction. This divides by 2 and divides by 2. This simplified to root 7 plus 1 all over 3. I hope you know how to simplify. We've practiced factoring. You know how to find a greatest common factor. That's important here. Why don't you pause your video and try question 3. So again, you multiplied by the conjugate of the denominator, root 3 minus root 6. When I multiplied the numerator, I noticed root 3 times root 3 is 3, and that here there would be a common factor of 3, so I just prime factored instead of multiplying and took out that 3. Now I notice in the denominator, 3 minus 6 is equal to negative 3, which meant that I should factor out that common factor of 3 here. 3 divided by 3 is 1. Root 3, or sorry, 3 root 2 divided by 3 is root 2. Now I can take out that common factor of 3. Again, I don't want to leave that negative 1 in the denominator, so we have the negative of 1 minus root 2. Or if we open the brackets, if we're not asked for factored form, negative 1 plus root 2, which would look really nice written as root 2 minus 1. But all of these are correct. This one here with the brackets, if you're asked for factored form. Question 4 looks interesting. Up until now, we've had a monomial in the numerator. This is giving us a binomial in the numerator. Let's see what happens. We still have to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the conjugate of the denominator. Why don't you pause your video and multiply those out, the numerator and the denominator. If you don't remember how to multiply that numerator, root 2 minus root 6 times root 2 minus root 6, you should go back to that video lesson and do some practice there. Otherwise, I hope you were able to find a numerator of 8 minus 4 root 3 all over 2 minus 6. Now, I see that 4 is common in the numerator, so I'm going to divide out that 4. And when I subtract here, we have negative 4. I can divide out 4. And again, that negative sign, I don't want to leave it in the denominator. So we'll bring it to the numerator, minus bracket 2 minus root 3, which again could be written as negative 2 plus root 3 or root 3 minus 2. All of those would be fine. Pause your video, see what you can do with question 5. Now, I didn't do all of the multiplication work here or talk about how to simplify that. We've already done that in another video lesson. That work was done on rough work paper. I've just put the product here. So if you have any questions about that, maybe watch that video lesson again, make an appointment to see me and get help, or attend one of the math review classes that we offer before the test. Now I see that this denominator is going to be 5 minus 6, which is going to equal negative 1. So rather than rewrite all of that again, I see that I have the negative of 2 root 10 plus 4 root 3. Oh, I see I have like terms there. I missed that before. Do I really have like terms? I guess I do. Let's combine those. Plus 9 root 3. I have 2 sets of like terms. Wow, I wasn't paying attention. Watch for like terms. Like radicals here, I can combine those. 2 root 10 plus 3 root 10 is 5 root 10. And then like radicals here, root 3. So 4 root 3 plus 5 root 3 If you're asked for factored form, you could write this. Otherwise, minus 5 root 10 minus 9 root 3. Question 6 certainly looks a bit difficult. Let's do this one step at a time. I see that the numerator can be simplified. Why don't you pause your video and do that? Okay, so I simplified 2 root 12. I simplified root 8. I hope you've had enough practice simplifying radicals that that's not a problem. Now we need to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the conjugate. Remember that we are always multiplying by the conjugate of the denominator. We're trying to get rid of the radical signs in the denominator. And the way to do that is to multiply by the conjugate. We don't want to change its value, so we multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same expression. Pause your video and multiply those out. Again, I hope this multiplication worked out for you. Remember that you had to use the distributive property. You were multiplying the first term in this bracket by the second term, or sorry, the second bracket, and the second term in the first bracket by the second bracket. We had like terms, 12 root 6 minus 2 root 6. The rest of these are not like terms, but we did have a common factor. 2 was common in each of these integers. Now I can divide out 2 here. So our final answer, 5 root 6 plus 6 root 2 plus 6 all over 6. You cannot combine the numerators any further. They are not like radicals, and you cannot divide out those 6's. This 6 here is a term. We can only divide common factors, and factors multiply each other. That's why we could divide here, because we have 2 multiplying that factor. Again, there are lots of questions here for you to practice. The answers are posted on the class Moodle page. Make sure you use those to prepare for your test and your final exam.